Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn of Ordos Xenos, the destroyer of worlds, judge of billions, executioner of the Imperium's enemies, stood silent and stern from his vantage point overlooking the dregs and slums of Necromunda's hive primus, Underhive. He had heard of dread named Necromunda. Almost all within the Imperium had. A hive city of abandoned domes, dead factories, and ghetto slums, all built upon one another like desiccated corpses, piled upon one another in one last desperate glimpse of the sun. Not that anyone within the hellish depths could see the sun. Bellowing clouds of toxins and industrial waste blackened the benighted skies. Eisenhorn had crossed the thresholds into the mysterious Xenos worlds, pocketing in the dead spaces of the warp. He had traversed deserts and wastelands, frozen worlds, imperial utopias, and even planets gripped in the tentacle claws of chaos, but all paled in comparison to the blighted urban hellscape of the sprawl of decaying metal below. Necromunda was the realm of planetary governor Gerontius Helmwar, a shrewd, corrupt, and megalomaniac who ruled Hive Primus with an iron fist. His best method of lording over such an unruly and anarchist realm? Violence. Over the last 7,000 years of his house rules over Necromunda was kept secured by the constant infighting, backstabbing, intrigue, and constant conflict between Necromunda's great houses and the innumerable gangs who fought under their banner. Cawdor, Escher, Goliath, Orlok, Van Sard, and Delak. These names held great sway with their notorious and convoluted histories of blood-soaked violence and gang warfare. How the planet survived such constant skirmishes, Eisenhorn couldn't imagine. But it wasn't rampant gang warfare, or even lawlessness, which summoned Eisenhorn to such a fallen place. The Inquisition received word from Lord Helmwar of sinister plots and heretical happenings of the Hive City's poorest and most desperate of citizens. Miners, factory workers, construction crews, and laborers silently met in quiet corners and shadowy confines, discussing talk of insurrection and open rebellion. They called themselves the Red Faction, a brotherhood of peasants and laborers uniting under one banner to tear down and topple the old regimes and to rebuild anew. Such groups dotted the Imperium's countless stars and did little to change the fates of their citizens. But more sinister whispers of hybrids, psychers, and something far more eldritch reached the ears of Lord Helmwar and the ranks of the Inquisition. Talks of something festering within the bowels of a subterranean hell called the Upside Down haunted the benighted districts of Necromunda as mass disappearances and abductions spread throughout the Underhive. An investigation was needed, and Eisenhorn was tasked with seeking the truth. He departed his ship with a kill team's complement from the Deathwatch under the command of Sergeant Dothros of the Minotaur's chapter. Eisenhorn's mission was simple: investigate the activities of the Red Faction, assess the situation of the happenings within the Upside Down, and purge whatever heretics stood in the way. Eisenhorn prepared himself for what was to come, because rumors or not, life had taught him one simple fact: that truth often lied in between of what was and what may be. Hey there nation, welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander CheapSkate, and we are back with another edition of It Came From the Sump Season 2. This is our brand new series that we're running for a limited time. It is a Necromunda Narrative Campaign, and this is resurrecting an old fan favorite from our days of doing Tales from the Underhive. This is our series of videos dedicated to a campaign called It Came From the Sump. Now, in case you were unaware of what that scenario was all about or what that campaign series is, it's pretty much a throwback to B-movie type of monsters where you would watch old school movies where monsters would come up and try to devour people. Well, Necromunda made a rule set called It Came from the Sump, and it pretty much uses the same kind of narrative idea where it's more of a horror-based game and that you have, of course, monsters and things like that you need to battle. And it was a very popular series for our channel, and now we're doing a second edition of that with It Came from the Sump 2. And as you guys saw from the little introduction earlier, this is a narrative-based campaign. It is ran by the character name is Gregor. Eisenhorn is his name, and his job is to investigate the happenings of the Underhive in a place called the Upside Down by investigating a rebellious group of laborers. They're called the Red Faction. And he's traveling with a kill team called Kill Team Dothros in order to investigate it and to see it. So as you can see here, we have this huge 4x6 table that we're playing on with the entire cityscape on one half of the board with an underground layer on the right-hand side of the table. And on this game, my best friend Kiddo, she is playing the scenario for us on this one, so because that is a narrative-based scenario, and we'll explain the rules as we go through it. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this game on a roll. Alright, just to give you some idea about the rules, which you'll notice that these little containers split all over the place. These are supply caches as the scenario goes through, and we'll explain the rules as we actually go through the battle report. But if any of the members of the kill team, as well as the main character, takes any damage, so long as they go up to those supply caches, they can heal up all their wounds that they're carrying for the characters, as well as get rid of any flesh wounds. So if you're wondering what those are ahead of time, that's what that's about. So let's get this game on a roll. So the objective of the game is for my friend Kiddo to move along her little kill team of Gregor Eisenhorn as well as Kill Team Dothros to move through the cityscape on their way to the Upside Down, which is represented by the tombs. You guys are familiar with this set of terrain as you've seen in our battle reports and other Necromunda battle reports, as well as Kill Team. And as you can see, we have different supply caches inside of that tombs area as well. What's going to happen is that my friend Kiddo's got to battle her way through the cityscape with her kill team. She has to go directly into the tombs and investigate what is going on. And she has to survive the entire obstacle course, and of course make it to the other side of the table outside the tombs in order to make it to safety. And that's pretty much the objective that she's going with. As she moves across the battlefield, more challenges will be revealed as she moves through the battlefield to represent the fact that she can't see everything all at once, and she'll deal with whatever problems come her way. And with that, we go directly to the deployment phase. So as you can see here on the top of the Crown Complex, which is the tallest building on our battlefield that we're playing on, my friend Kiddo, she sets up her military forces. As you can see, all 5 members of Kill Team Dothros are located thusly, as well as Gregor Eisenhorn. If you want to see exactly what these guys are bringing in terms of their rule packs, as well as their stats and things, you can go to my Blogger website. I do have a site on Blogger. It's called It Came from the Sump Season 2, and I have a rule pack out for the Kill Team Dothros, as well as Gregor Eisenhorn. And of course, we'll just go through the rules real quick. Pretty much how it works is that every single time her turn starts, she has 2 types of turns. The first type is called a narrative turn, where basically she just kind of moves her forces around as she sees fit. Doesn't have to really do anything in all that important in terms of shooting or fighting. She's just moving her forces as quick as she can across the map so that way she can reveal it. As she goes across the map, if she runs into any enemies, the game then switches over to a normal edition of Warhammer 40k rules, where she starts getting her command points and she fights like normal until the next narrative turn. And I'll explain that as we go through the entire game. So as you can see here, Kill Team Dothros as well as Gregor Eisenhorn, they landed right on the top of the Crown Complex, and now they got to work their way down to the floor level of the Underhive and then maneuver across the cityscape towards the Upside Down. Alright, so with that being said, we go directly to the top of turn number 1 for the Deathwatch, and right off the bat, they start off with 1 command point. From this point forward, every single time she gets a new secondary command point, she'll get 2. One for just getting one for normal rules, and then a second one for her Authority of the Inquisition special rule for the Kiddo, where Gregor Eisenhorn automatically generates another command point. So with that, we start with the narrative turns. The first thing that my friend Kiddo does is that she takes her sniper for her kill team, that is Demos of the Dark Angels. She actually has to move down to the lower levels where there's a gantry walkway between the Crown Complex as well as the Oak Branch office building, so that way he can move her across. And as he does that, of course, he triggers an event where you start seeing enemies populating the field. Meanwhile, the rest of the kill team, as well as Gregor Eisenhorn, makes it down to the bottom level. Taking point on the right-hand side is Brother Silence, which is the Black Shield. On the left-hand side is Cadmus of the Imperial Fists. He's the kill team operator's armed with a frag cannon. Right behind them on the left-hand side is Sergeant Dothros. He's a member of the Minotaurs. He's got a Storm Shield as well as a Common Melta. On the right-hand side, that is Brother Xiphos of the Salamanders. He's armed with a Furnace Heavy Bolter. And then right behind them, of course, is Gregor Eisenhorn. And by deploying her forces in such a way, we trigger our very first event, so we jump directly to the Genestealer Cults turn. And the very first wave of opponents first show up. Right across the street, across the gantry walkway on the top of the Crown, the Oak Branch Complex, is a 3-man kill team of Genestealer Cultists. You have a guy who's armed with a heavy mining laser with 2 other Genestealer Cultists armed with auto guns. And on the bottom floor, right beneath it on the ground level of the Oak Tree Complex, you also have another 5-man kill team as well, 5-man squad of Genestealer Cults armed with autoguns. And right across the intersection, right across the entrance for where the main character is located at, there is a foxhole, and inside that foxhole is another 5-man squad of Genestealer Cults as well. So now that the Genestealer Cults have been revealed, we go directly to the top of turn number 1, and my friends roll for initiative to see who goes first. Alright, so that means the Deathwatch gets to go first, so Kiddo decides to take her command points and spend it on to Deimos of the Dark Angels, so that way you can shoot twice during the shooting phase. So now that the command phase is over with, we go directly to the movement phase. And as you can see in this photo, my friend Kiddo spends no time whatsoever moving her forces out. First of all, she advances up forward with Brother Silence, moves up his normal 6-inch movement allowance, so that way he goes around the corner to face the squad of Genestealer Cults coming from the foxhole. Right behind him in support is Brother Cadmus of the Iron Fist with his frag cannon. On the top there, Sergeant Dothros as well as Xiphon. They move around the left-hand side and are laying down some suppressive fire from the Genestealer Cults coming out of the bottom floor of the Oak Crown Complex. And then, of course, Gregor Eisenhorn brings up the back by staying behind cover so that way he doesn't get shot. During the shooting phase, Brother Silence chucks a frag grenade directly into the squad of Genestealer Cultists right there in the middle of the table, and at the same time, Brother Cadmus opens up with his Deathwatch frag cannon, and they manage to pretty much kill the entire squad except for one lone flamer as well. So because of that one flaming operator, Genestealer Cultist, he will need to take a panic test to see exactly what happens to him when we get to the morale phase. Meanwhile, on the top floor levels of the Oak Crown Complex, Deimos of the Dark Angels takes a frag grenade and sends it lobbing towards this 3-man fire team, manages to hit all 3 of those guys with the blast template. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to cause any wounds with the frag grenade, but because the frag grenade has knockback rules, that means 2 of the members who got hit with the grenade get thrown back an inch, and because they're so close to that ledge, they end up falling off of the building right in the middle of the street. We'll talk about exactly what happened to those guys. The second guy, however, gets taken out with the Stalker bolt rifle that Deimos has because he has that 2-shot ability going on for his command points. So because of that, the Kiddo managed to take out that Genestealer Cultist as well. And as you can see in this photo there, the 2 Genestealer Cultists who got blown off the roof of the building with the frag grenade, and those guys got blasted off the oblivion with that part. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we go directly to the top of the Genestealer Cults. Alright, so that takes directly to the top of the turn for the Genestealer Cults. This photo is taken after the move phase, and as you can see, there has been some dramatic movement. Up on the top of the screen there, the 5-man team of Genestealer Cultists move out of the bottom floor of the building, so that way they can start intercepting Sergeant Dothros as well as Xiphon up there at the top. At the same time, though, the one lone Genestealer Cultist broke his nerve test because he starts taking off, running back towards the tomb in order to escape the hell that's pretty much coming his way. Here's a close-up of that Genestealer Cultist with a flamer running for his life, and he pretty much runs off the table edge for this point, so because of that, he doesn't become a threat for the rest of the battle. And here's a close-up of the squad of Genestealers leaving the bottom floor of the Oak Crown Complex and making their way towards Sergeant Dothros. During the shooting phase, all 4 of them open up with autoguns against Sergeant Dothros, hopefully take out that Deathwatch Space Marine. But unfortunately for them, the only thing they managed to do is cause 1 wound onto Sergeant Dothros. And each of the kill team Space Marines are carrying 2 wounds apiece in this campaign setting. So because of that, not much really happens for that most part. So that being said, we go directly to the top of the Deathwatch's turn. And starting off the command phase, my friend Kiddo earns 2 more command points for her Deathwatch squad. So because of that, she's now up to 3 command points. She decides at this point not to spend any of her command points because she just wants to try using just the normal rules and abilities of her Deathwatch squad members at this point. So during the movement phase, the first thing she does is starts shifting her forces over to the right-hand side of that street. She starts off with Sergeant Dothros, who takes cover on the far right-hand side, so that way he can lay down some suppressive fire onto that squad of Genestealer Cultists. And he also moves up Brother Xiphon, so that way he can lay down some suppressive fire with his Infernus Bolter as well. At the same time, she also brings back Brother Silence as well as Cadmus of the Imperial Fist and have him take cover behind that sight blocker, which is in the middle of the intersection, and then Gregor Eisenhorn also ducks in behind cover behind that position as well, so that way he doesn't have to worry about getting shot at. Meanwhile, on the top, Sergeant Deimos of the Dark Angels moves across the gantry walkway and gets himself into a good overwatching position with his Stalker bolt rifle. So with the move phase over with, we go directly to the shooting. And the first thing the Kiddo does is take aim with Xiphon's heavy flamer for his Infernus Bolter gun. He cuts loose and manages to kill 3 of those cultists with the flaming shot that he has from his flamer, which is pretty awesome to see that happen. At the same time, Sergeant Dothros finishes the last two Genestealer Cultists with his melta-gun as well as his bolter as well. And of course, because they're all dead, they pretty much just evaporate to dust at that point. And what's kind of cool about this campaign is because the way I've written up the Deathwatch characters for this campaign, it's kind of like what I would imagine narratively it would look like if a kill team of Deathwatch operatives were actually fighting against something like the Genestealer Cults. I just imagine them just kind of steamrolling through the different squads and the different challenges that kind of come their way. So that part's kind of cool as well. So now that we're done with the fighting in this part of the turn, we then go directly to the next turn phase. The next turn phase is a narrative turn, so all my friend Kiddo has to do is maneuver her forces accordingly, so that until of course she triggers another event in the campaign. Alright, so during the narrative turn, as she sends her forces to the right hand side of the table, you can see the Genestealer Cults have then launched another attack as well. Like I said, as the kiddo goes across the battlefield, maneuvering her kill teams across the battlefield, more challenges will arrive as she goes through the entire battlefield. So as you can see here, right at the entrance of the tomb, it looks like it'd be a small little platoon of Genestealer Cultists. Up in the top, right next to those walkways in the top of this table, there's another 5-man squad. I believe one of those guys are just all 5 of them are with auto guns. Right in front of them is another 5-man squad. One of those guys armed with a heavy seismic cannon. He's also got 4 members armed with autoguns. And then, of course, you have the Goliath Rock Crusher, which has a bulldozing blade, as well as in the back of it is a Primus. He's in the back kind of running along, giving commands. And then right behind them is another 5-man squad of Genestealer Cultists with a heavy mining laser located in that group as well. So the challenges, as you can see, are starting to become more and more difficult as time goes on in this scenario. Here's a close-up of the Goliath Rock Grinder, as well as 2 squads of Genestealer Cultists are next to it. And you can also see the supply caches above and below these squad of troops, so that way if my friend Kiddo gets any of her forces wounded and they go to those supply caches, they remove all flesh wound effects, and they also remove any wounds that they might be carrying as well. So that part is kind of cool. And here's a close-up of another 5-man squad of Genestealer Cults on the top of the intersection, and one of those guys is also carrying a cult icon, so these guys will get bonuses in the combat phase. So, during the move phase, as you can see, 2 squads of Genestealer Cults move up along the intersection between the Crown Complex as well as the MCI Chemical Tank Towers to start maneuvering and assaulting down the street towards Kill Team Dothros. Right behind in support is also the Goliath Rock Crusher with the Primus running in the back. Meanwhile, on the left-hand side, the other 5-man squad, who's armed with a heavy mining laser, they advance forward so that way they can climb the MCI Chemical Work Tower and on the top of the tank there to try to outflank and also get some suppressive fire from an overhead position down onto the kill team. Luckily for the kiddo, all my shots were pretty much ineffective against her, so because that we go directly to the top of the turn for the Deathwatch. And as you can see in this photo, my friend the kiddo also earns 2 more command points for a grand total of 5, which she could also use throughout her turn in order to give her troops kind of bonuses as the fighting continues. During the move phase, she does press her assault forward. The first thing she does, she charges in Brother Silence and he engages that close combat with that Genestealer Cult squad on the left-hand side. At the same time, she also just moves up her normal 6 inches movement allowance for most of her kill teams. Up in the front, of course, is Sergeant Dothros with his Storm Shield. Right behind him is Cadmus, as well as Xiphon. And she kind of tucks Gregor Eisenhorn right behind the MCI Chemical Work Tower, so that way it doesn't worry about getting shot at and the firefight that's about to start here in a second. During the psychic phase, she does decide to use one of her psychic abilities off onto the Genestealer Cult Primus, so that way he's unable to do much of anything. Because she also dominates him as well, he ends up taking his needle pistol and actually opening fire to one of his members of the Genestealer Cultist squads that are next to him. And as you can see in this photo, the needle gun is pointed directly at the Genestealer Cult is carrying a heavy seismic cannon. He gets hit and he also gets killed in the process of doing so. Because of that, that squad doesn't have a heavy weapon at this point. Meanwhile, during the shooting phase, between the shots between Xiphus and his heavy and furnace bolter, as well as Brother Cadmus with his frag cannon, his Deathwatch frag cannon, and of course Sergeant Dothros with his combi melta, needless to say, they just had no problem whatsoever just wiping out these Genestealer Cultists like it was nobody's business. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think only one of those guys, or 1 or 2 guys, actually survived from one of the squads after all the shooting is said and done. And the thing makes things worse for the Genestealer Cults. Demos of the Dark Angels takes aim at the Stalker bolt gun and fires twice. Manages to pop off both of the Genestealer Cultists on the top of the MCI Chemical Work Tower there. He managed to take out the heavy mining laser operator as well as one of the auto gun wielding Genestealer Cultists at the same time. So things are not looking very good for the Genestealer Cults at this point. And during the combat phase, my friend Kiddo activates the ability for Brother Silence to be able to fight twice during the fight phase. He has no problem sweeping through both the remaining members of the Genestealer Cults, chopping those guys down with his power sword, and he does a 3-inch follow through to move through the rest of the squad to engage the Goliath Rock Crusher into close combat as well. So things are looking very bad for my Genestealer Cultists at this point. And during the morale phase, because those Genestealer cultists took such a whipping from Demos on the top of the inside chemical work tower, they fail their psychology test and they start running away as well. And just to give you guys a heads up, this squad doesn't never regain their morale. They just keep on running and just eventually fly off the table because they're so worried about not getting killed at this point. During the Genestealer Cult's turn, the first thing I do is I disengage my Goliath Rock Crusher away from Brother Silence. So because I do fall back, I think 8 inches, so that way the Goliath Rock Crusher can survive. At the same time, the Primus charges forward and engages Brother Silence into close combat, so because that the two of them will be fighting. And because I fell back with my vehicles and one of my characters is engaged in close combat, there is no shooting phase, so we go straight to the combat phase. And as you can see in the combat phase, Brother Silence managed to put 2 wounds onto my Primus. I was unable to cause any damage back onto Brother Silence at all. And the reason why is because one of his armor saves, he saved most of the wounds that I did that way. Any attacks that got through his armor save, it got put away by the invulnerable save from his Storm Shield. So Brother Silence is very, very hard to kill at that point. So with the Genestealer Cult's turn over with, we go directly to the top of the turn for the Deathwatch. So going back to Deathwatch, my friend the Kiddo gets 2 more command points put back because she used 2 of her command points to allow Brother Silence to fight twice in the fight phase. And so she kind of just banks those 5 points to use later on during the turn. And during the movement phase, she starts moving forward with all of her troops to start occupying positions to get to that first set of cache, supply cache. Right now, Brother Silence, of course, is engaged with the Primus, so he doesn't really do much there. However, on the left-hand side there, Brother Cadmus, the Imperial Fist, turns around the corner and takes aim with his frag cannon because he's going to open up onto the Goliath Rock Crusher. At the same time, she also moves up Brother Xiphon up to the right, to the top of the screen to make sure that he can lay down any suppressive fire that might come around that corner, and then Sergeant Dothros as well as Gregor Eisenhorn move into position as well. Here's a close-up of the entire kill team kind of assembling around that first supply cache. I also forgot to mention that Demos with Dark Angels also does an advanced move, so that way he can move all the way down to the ground level of the floor with the rest of his kill team as well. So with the move phase over with, we go directly to the shooting phase. And in the shooting phase, Brother Cadmus of the Imperial Fist opens up with his Deathwatch frag cannon, and not only does he manage to hit the Goliath Rock Crusher, but he also manages to destroy it as well. And that's why we have the blast template looking right there as well, because in the rule system we use, vehicles do explode in this game, so it blows up. And luckily, just barely missed those 3 other Genestealer cultists who are trying to run away. So pretty dramatic round of shooting for the Deathwatch. And in the combat phase, Brother Silence had no problem whatsoever putting the last few wounds down onto the Genestealer Cultists as well. And with that being said, we go directly back to the top of the turn for the Deathwatch because now it's time for Kiddo's narrative turn. So during her narrative turn, the Kiddo tries to move forward directly into the tombs. She also accessed those supply caches in the back there, so that way her entire kill team is now healed up. None of them are carrying any wounds, they have no flesh wound encounters. But as they move forward into the entrance, they realize that it is blocked up there at the head. You can see that rubble pile right there in the middle of the intersection. So because of that, they realize that this entrance into the tombs will not be able to help them out. They won't be able to go into the upside down through this passageway, which means they have to go further down in order to do so. And because they have to move further down to the second entrance, that does trigger another narrative event. And as you can see in this photo, the Genestealers pop up their very last surprise in the city. 3 more 5-man squads of Genestealer cultists pop up. One is in the top of the Alexander's department store there on the left-hand side. Another 5-man squad's up in the front as well as the back of the limo. And right in the middle of the battlefield is the Interceptor, which is a limousine that the Genestealer cult leadership uses. And inside of that is a Magus that is hiding out inside the vehicle at this point. So because of that, we go directly to the top of the turn for the Genestealer cults because they basically sprung initiative and the surprise attack on the Deathwatch. And the first thing that ends up happening is I decided to charge forward with my first 5-man squad of Genestealer cultists against the Deathwatch. And as they storm forward, of course, the Deathwatch overwatches with both their melta-gun as well as with their Deathwatch frag cannons. And since both of those weapons do hit automatically, they just managed to kill 2 more members of the Deathwatch of the Genestealer cults. The other 3 do manage to make it in close combat, but half the squad got killed on the way out. At the same time, I also pull out the mages out the back of the limo, so that way he can jump with that 5-man squad right behind them, so that way he gets some cover from his troops. And the limousine, of course, is planning on charging forward and trying to ram as many Deathwatch members as possible. And of course, the rest of the Genestealer cult on the left-hand side on the second floor of the department store just stand their ground so that way they can start putting some overwatching fire. Here's a close-up of the 5-man squad of Genestealer cultists charging directly into the Deathwatch, and 2 of them being gunned down along the way. And here's a close-up of the Magus jumping out of the limousine and getting right behind that little 5-man squad and using his ride as a shield so that way he doesn't get shot to pieces. And during the shooting phase, not much really happened during the shooting phase. I did manage to aim with my mining laser onto Cadmus. I was able to put a wound on that man, but that was about the only thing I was able to do. The auto guns for the rest of the kill team, rest of the Genestealer squads didn't really do much of anything against the kill team, so that part was kind of depressing. At the beginning of the combat phase, my friend the Kiddo spends 4 command points. She puts 2 command points on both Sergeant Dothros of the Minotaurs as well as Brother Silence, so that way they can fight twice during the fight phase. And as you can see in this photo, they had no problem chopping through those 3 Genestealer Cults that charge against them. Because they get to fight twice, they pile in another 3 inches forward to go directly into the Interceptor, and they start engaging that vehicle in close combat. And as you can see in this photo, they had no problem whatsoever destroying that limousine back to its baser elements in the combat phase. The limousine does blow up with the large blast template, but nobody's pretty much hit by that, so they're okay. And if anything was to hit those 2 guys, they both have the storm shields, so they would have been fine anyways. So with that being said, that ends the turn for the Genestealer Cults, and we go for the top of the turn for the Deathwatch. Alright, so that takes us directly to the top of the Deathwatch. As you can see in this photo, my friend the Kiddo nets herself 4 command points that she can use for this turn. And during the move phase, of course, she moves up her forces as quick as she can to engage the remaining squads of Genestealer Cultists. The first thing that she does, she charges forward Sergeant Dothros as well as Brother Silence directly towards the mages. Brother Silence is taking on the mages, while Sergeant Dothros is taking on the Genestealer Cultists next to him. At the same time, she also brings up the rest of her kill team towards that supply cache, first leading off with Cadmus of the Iron Fist towards that supply cache, that way he can heal up. Right next to him is Xiphon of the Salamanders, this Infernus Heavy Bolter, as well as Demos and Gregor Eisenhorn. And that pretty much makes it the move phase for her. And during the psychic as well as shooting phases, as you can see here, most of those guys get shot to pieces in most cases. Between Cadmus, Xiphon, as well as Gregor Eisenhorn and Demos of the Dark Angels, they had no problem making little work of these Genestealer Cultists. As you can see, they've all been just kind of pretty much shot to pieces. So with the shooting phase over with, we go directly to the combat phase. And the combat phase, of course, she spends 4 more command points. That way, Brother Dothros Sergeant Dothros, as well as Brother Silence can fight twice in the combat phase. What's his name? Brother Silence does get a wound for his troubles. However, they manage to kill off the rest of the Genestealer Cultists with little or no effect. So because of that role being over with, we go directly to the Deathwatch's narrative phase. And during the narrative phase, the Deathwatch uses that next supply cache to heal up all their wounds and to remove any wound counters that they have for flesh wounds, and they make their way through the entrance directly into the tombs to investigate what is happening in the Upside Down. And as you can see in this photo, they move into the very first intersection of the Upside Down. Brother Silence is taking point, while Cadmus as well as Xiphon break off to the left and right respectively, while the rest of the kill team kind of stacks up behind them to prepare themselves for whoever might be coming down next. And because they got this far into the stage, we didn't have another series of reveals taking place with challenges populating the battlefield. As you can see, more challenges quickly populate the battlefield as well, this time taking the form of Acolyte Hybrids. Up in the top next to Xiphon in the center of the screen, 2 more Acolyte Hybrids pop up. They're all armed with autoguns and fighting knives. Same thing with the right hand side, as well as the 1 supply cache on the left hand side. So because of the threats have been revealed, it now becomes the turn for the Genestealer Cults to move first. During the move phase, they do charge forward and try to engage the Deathwatch members into close combat. However, because Sergeant Dothros has a automatically hitting melted gun, he manages to kill one of the Acolyte Hybrids as he charges towards them. The second one makes it through though, so he has to fight in close combat. At the same time, as the Genestealer Cultist, the Acolyte Hybrid, tries to charge into Brother Cadmus, he pops him with the Deathwatch auto frag cannon. So because that Acolyte gets killed, and meanwhile one of the Genestealer Cultists does engage in close combat against Brother Silence. Because that he will need to fight him in the combat phase. During the combat phase, Sergeant Dothros takes a wound as well as Brother Silence. He takes 2 wounds and earns himself the very first of his flesh wound counters. So because that he is -1 to weapon skill as well as ballista skill for this turn, unless he heals up. And the rest of the, of course, Acolyte Hybrids got chopped down by the rest of the Deathwatch members as they took care of them. So with that being said, we go directly to the top of the turn for the Deathwatch. My friend the Kiddo activates 4 more command points because that she's back up to top again with her command point list, and during the move phase she starts moving her forces forward again in order to start investigating the Upside Down. The first thing that she does, she moves up Brother Dothros, Sergeant Dothros, as well as Sergeant Cadmus, as Xiphon, as well as Gregor Eisenhorn. She moves them up to the top of the screen. As you can see in that little chamber there in the top left hand corner, 3 more Acolyte Hybrids pop up to around that supply cache. At the same time, she also moves up Cadmus of the Imperial Fist with his frag cannon taking point, and right behind him is Brother Demos of the Dark Angels. And as you can see there, they pop up 2 more Acolyte Hybrids over there in the middle chamber, as well as a chamber on the right hand side. Meanwhile, she runs up forward with Brother Silence towards the supply cache in the bottom left hand corner, so that way she can use that to heal herself. Here's a close-up of the 2 Deathwatch members, that is Cadmus as well as Demos, taking on the 2 Acolyte Hybrids ahead of them. And here's a close-up of Sergeant Dothros facing down 3 Acolyte hybrids, along with Xiphon as well as Gregor Eisenhorn. Meanwhile, on the bottom left-hand side, Brother Silence does activate the supply cache, and then boom, ends up being a booby trap with a melt-a-bomb, so that because of that, a massive explosion rings out through that entirety of that chamber. And unfortunately for the kiddo, she loses Brother Silence in the process of doing that. He does die from his wounds from the melt-a-bomb, and so he goes directly out of action. And at this point that I reveal to the kiddo that some of these caches might be explosive, some of them might have nothing in them at all, and some actually might have medication that they use to patch themselves. What ends up happening is every single time my friend the kiddo activates one of these supply caches, she has to roll d6. 1 to 2 is a trap, 3 to 4 is nothing, and 5 and 6 is where they actually have stuff to cure them with. So now my friend the kiddo has to be careful with her Deathwatch members to make sure that she's going after the only really good and only necessary when she goes after those supply caches. Meanwhile, during the shooting phase, Sergeant Dothros as well as Xiphon open up on the 3 Acolytes in the middle of the supply cache chamber, and they manage to kill all 3 of those guys, putting them out of action immediately, which just kind of shows you how powerful the shooting is for the Deathwatch. During the turn for the Genestealer Cults, more threats do reveal themselves, and as you can see, the challenges are getting more exponentially more difficult as time goes on. Up on the top, I have 2 aberrants that pop up in the top left-hand corner to deploy the battlefield, and also in the bottom right-hand corner as well in the center. You can see I have 4 aberrants starting to pop at the battlefield at the same time. Also, if you notice in the back as well, I also have Genestealers, purebred Genestealers, starting to populate the battlefield as well. In the center, we do have some infestation points. We also have a Broodlord, followed up by 2 Genestealers in the center chamber, and then the back chamber, the entrance that my friend Kiddo brought her forces through, 3 more pure strain Genestealers also pop at the battlefield as well. So things are starting to look very, very bad for the kill team at this point. Here's a close-up of the aberrants on the bottom center portion of the battlefield, making their way towards Cadmus as well as Demos. And here's a close-up of the center chamber with the Broodlord as well as 2 other pure strain Genestealers right next to the 4 infestation points, which are inside the center chamber. And here's a close-up of the 3 Genestealers coming in from the entranceway that the kill team embarked into the area, starting to come behind the Deathwatch and start to assault them. And finally, here's a close-up of the 2 aberrants at the top of the screen, making their way towards Sergeant Dothros, as well as making their way towards Xiphon of the Salamanders. Alright, so that takes us directly to the Deathwatch's turn. As you can see in this photo, my friend the kiddo earned herself 2 more command points, so she's got a grand total of 4, which of course she can use for the remainder of the scenario to face the pure strain Genestealers are now starting to infest the tombs that Gregor Eisenhorn as well as the members of Kill Team Dothros are trying to investigate. Alright, so that takes us directly to the top of the move phase, and as you can see in this photo, my friend the kiddo decides to start taking the offense and start trying to kill their way and try to escape from the tombs. The first thing that she does is she maneuver both Sergeant Dothros on the upper left hand side as well as Xiphon of the Salamanders, and maneuvers them in such a way that they have a pincer attack of the 2 aberrants which are located in the top left hand corner of the screen. She also moves up Gregor Eisenhorn to meet up with Xiphos so that way they can try to escape. Unfortunately for the kiddo though, she doesn't realize where the barriers are located until she moves into a separate quadrant of the tombs, and as you can see on the right hand side of Xiphos, the passageway there is blocked, which means the only way for her to escape is to go down to the main intersection to the center chamber, fight her way past the Broodlord as well as the infestation points with the 2 other Genestealers, and then try to escape that way. So when she realizes that that passageway is blocked, she then maneuvers the other 2 members of the kill team. First off, she sends up Cadmus of the Imperial Fists. He gets into a position directly into the center location of the chamber, so that way he can take aim with his Deathwatch frag cannon against the Broodlord. And she also moves up Demos of the Dark Angels to the right hand side as well, so that way he can take pot shots of the Stalker bolt rifle at the 2 aberrants on the bottom screen as well. And unfortunately, when she goes to that location, she also realizes that that entryway is also blocked, so they have to go through the center chamber in order to escape. And that pretty much makes the move phase for the kiddo. Here's a close-up of the 2 aberrants making their way towards Demos, and Demos is going to take a pot shot at those guys with his Stalker pattern bolt rifle. And here's a close-up of Cadmus of the Imperial Fist getting ready to gun down that Genestealer Broodlord with his Deathwatch frag cannon, because that thing is a beast. And here's a close-up of both Xiphon as well as Sergeant Dothros getting ready to engage the 2 aberrants, which are located on the very top of the tombs there. And here's a close-up of Gregor Eisenhorn taking position there, getting ready to shoot at any Genestealer Cults that ends up charging his way. So with the move phase over with, we go directly to the shooting phase. And the first target that the kiddo decides to go after is one of the Genestealers are coming up towards Gregor Eisenhorn. She has Gregor Eisenhorn take aim with his Artificer bolt pistol. Not only did she manage to hit the Genestealer, also managed to wound it as well, taking it directly out of action. So because of that, she did buy herself a little bit of time from being charged at. At the same time, Sergeant Dothros as well as Xiphon of the Salamanders open up on the two Aberrants. Now the Aberrants do carry 2 wounds apiece, so they're a little bit harder to kill. So because that, Dothros opens up with his Comma Melta as well as his bolt gun to kill the first Aberrant. And then of course she then activates Xiphon with his Infernus Heavy Bolter. With the Heavy Bolter, she was able to cause 1 wound with the bolter shots, and then the second rave was hit with the Heavy Flamer, and that was able to finish off the last 2 Aberrants on the top of the screen there. So as you can see there, the entirety of those 2 Aberrants are now dead, and that allows her to buy some time to focus the rest of her energies towards the main intersection to the center chamber, because she has to exit that way in order to make it out. At the same time, she does take aim with Sergeant Demos of the Dark Angels, as open up with a Hellfire bolt from his stacker pattern bolt gun, was able to kill off the first Aberrant, so that part was kind of cool. But unfortunately, when she spent her command points to have him shoot again, both of his shots were ineffective. I think the first shot missed, and the second one didn't manage to wound, so because of that, he has the risk of being charged at by an Aberrant in the next turn. However, there is some good news. Cadmus of the Imperial Fist opens up with this Deathwatch frag cannon against the Broodlord and manages to plaster that guy against the wall by just blowing him halfway to hell, which is pretty awesome as well. Now, the only thing he does have to worry about, though, is because he's not shooting at a unit per se, he's only shooting at individual targets, he still has to worry about the other 2 Genestealers that might be charging at him during the Genestealer Cults phase. So with that, we go directly to the top of the Genestealer Cults, and as you can see in this photo, they basically start charging forward. The first thing that ends up happening is that one of the Genestealers charge directly into Gregor Eisenhorn, engaging that person in close combat. Another Pierce-Strained Genestealer is right behind them to follow up in the 6 o'clock position. At the same time, in the center chamber, both Genestealer Cult Genestealers charge forward directly into Cadmus. Cadmus does, of course, open up with his frag cannon, but unfortunately both Snake Eyes on that part, so was unable to kill any of those guys. So because of that, he will have to engage in close combat. And the same thing exactly happens with the Aberrant charging directly into Demos of the Dark Angels. He was unable to hit him or wound him during the Overwatch, so because of that, they will need to fight them in close combat. Here's a close-up of Gregor Eisenhorn, get ready to tie it down, throw it down with a Pierce-Strained Genestealer, so he's got to worry about that. And here's a close-up of both Cadmus as well as Demos fighting those 2 Genestealers, as well as the Aberrant here on the right-hand side. And since none of these units can shoot, we skip the shooting phase and we go directly to the combat phase. And as you can see in this photo, Gregor Eisenhorn does manage to take a wound for his troubles, but he opens up with his rune staff in close combat against the Genestealer, managed to plaster that guy right to the bottom of the cavern there. So because of that, that Genestealer is now dead. However, unfortunately for the kiddo, both Demos of the Dark Angels as well as Cadmus of the Imperial Fist, they both get chopped to pieces and pretty much eaten alive by the 2 Genestealers as well as the Aberrant that destroyed them. So with that being said, that pretty much ends the Genestealer Cult's turn, and we go directly to the top for the Deathwatch. So with the top of the Deathwatch, my friend the kiddo maxes out the number of command points she can carry for the rest of the scenario, which is 6 points. So now she has some 6 points of command points to use tactics, as well as to do rerolls and things in order to survive this next few rounds of the game, because unfortunately for her, 2 more members of her kill team got killed. The only people she has left are Sergeant Dothros, Gregor Eisenhorn, as well as Xiphon of the Salamanders. So because of that, she has to make use some really good timing and some tactics in order to survive what's coming next for this turn. So with the command phase over with, we go directly to the movement phase. And during the movement phase, she starts maneuvering down towards the main intersection, heading toward the center chamber. Up in the front is Xiphon of the Salamanders, not Xiphon, the Salamanders. Then Sergeant Dothros, the Minotaur, is taking point because he has a storm shield. Right behind him, stacked up, is Gregor Eisenhorn, and right behind him is the Xiphon of the Salamanders. So my friend the kiddo starts moving her forces down this straightaway. And during the shooting phase, Sergeant Dothros takes aim with his Melta and just melts and just destroys that Genestealer that was coming their way, and just kind of put him back to his basic elements at that point. There really isn't much anything else because there is no combat, so because of that, we go directly to the top of the Genestealer's turn. During the Genestealer's turn during the move phase, the 2 pure-brained Genestealers that were located in the middle of the center chamber decided to burrow deep into the earth and disappear, which is never a good thing for my friend the kiddo, because those Genestealers are now escaping in order to grab much more Genestealers to help them out in the coming combat. Meanwhile, the Aberrant can't do that ability, so because of that, he maneuvers in position in order to charge forward directly into Sergeant Demos. And so during the charge phase, he does run forward in order to try to get into Sergeant Dothros' face. But during the Overwatch phase where the Aberrant tried to charge forward, Dothros opens up with his melted gun and just destroys the Aberrant with no problem whatsoever. So because of that, we go directly to the next turn for the Deathwatch, and because all the threats have been eliminated off the table, the Deathwatch go through their narrative movement phase. And so for the rest of the narrative phase, it's just my friend the Kiddo moving her forces across the battlefield as quickly as she can until she triggers the next event. So you can see in this photo, Sergeant Dothros is taking point with Gregor Eisenhorn falling behind, and you have Xiphon watching the 6 o'clock being the rear gunner on this one. And as you also can notice too, all 3 members of this kill team are carrying wounds. They're carrying 1 wound apiece, so they're partially injured, and they have to worry about the threats that might be coming their way. As they enter the intersection, start heading towards that center chamber, they initialize the next wave of challenges, and because of that, we jump directly to the Genestealer Cults' turn. So with that, we go directly to the Genestealer Cults' turn. As you can see, the new wave of challenges have now erupted into the battlefield. First of all, as you can see in that center photo on the left-hand side, we have 7 pure strain Genestealers that just quickly populate that left-hand chamber. And right in the middle of it all, on the left-hand side in that chamber, that is the Mind Flayer, which is of course, Patriarch, which is like a leader of the Genestealer Cults. With only 2 members of the Deathwatch left, as well as Gregor Eisenhorn, there isn't really much they can do because the odds are pretty much stacked against them. So during the narrative phase, real quick, Gregor Eisenhorn, of course, is staring down towards the center, looking at that back trail, but watching their 6, while both Xiphon as well as for Sergeant Dothros go to the center chamber on the bottom section of the screen. They do access that supply cache, they roll off, and they actually manage to heal their wounds on this one. So it wasn't booby-trapped, and it wasn't a dud. So because of that, they did get to heal themselves. Unfortunately, though, they have a whole wave of Genestealers that are coming their way, and they got to move very, very quick, otherwise they're going to get killed. Here's a close-up of the Mind Flayer just recently arriving onto the battlefield, getting ready to put the pain on these Deathwatch kill team, as well as Gregor Eisenhorn for destroying and interrupting their happenings and their schemes that they have been going on down here in the tombs the entire time. And here's a close-up of the wave of Genestealers that are getting ready to prowl through these tunnels and go after both Gregor Eisenhorn as well as the members of the Deathwatch in order to avenge their fallen comrades that got destroyed in the earlier rounds of combat. So that being said, we go directly to the top of the turn for the Deathwatch. And as you can see, as they start maneuvering out, they start breaking contact with the Genestealers. The first person who starts moving up forward is Gregor Eisenhorn. He moves all the way to the outside entrance of that center chamber. Right behind him is Xiphon of the Salamanders, taking up a covered position in the center of the chamber there, getting ready to fight. And then Dothros, of course, puts himself in between the tunnel there in order to hold off any of the Genestealers that come their way. Now, while it is true that these Genestealers, there are a lot of them, they can only go through the tunnel one at a time, and because of that, they have to take on Dothros all by himself, which is basically kind of what's called a reverse slope defense, which means only the Genestealers can come at Dothros one at a time. So even though there might be more of them, they really lose their advantage of numbers because Dothros is holding a choke point, and they got to find him on 1-1 combat in order to do that. Needless to say, during the combat phase, he opens up with his Comba Melta. First of all, his bolt gun manages to wipe out one of those Genestealers right off the bat, and his Melta gun, of course, has no problem, destroying the other one and melting him down into inky goo, is what he ends up doing for that part. Alright, so we go directly to the Genestealer Cults, and during the movie phase, you can see in this photo the Genestealers start moving up forward, trying to engage them in close combat. First of all, in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the Genestealers starting to stack their way through that center corridor towards Sergeant Dothros. He's got to try to hold those guys off as best as he can. At the same time, the Mind Flayer runs out of that chamber that he burrowed up from her, and he starts moving up towards the center, chamber, going through the top passageway to do so. Now, what my friend, the Kiddo, doesn't realize is that even though the passageway might be blocked, the Mind Flayer is so powerful he can actually just batter his way right through that barricade and keep on going forward. And I also informed the Kiddo of this as well. At this point, she kind of pressured out, just wondering, like, well, how do I, escape the situation? Which I affirmed her, of course, that the objective is to survive and try to escape the tombs. And for her to win, the only way she could do that is by having Gregor Eisenhorn get out of there, right? And that's pretty much what I tell her, so that way she can get prepared and, take the appropriate actions. Here's a close-up of the Genestealers getting ready to charge directly into Sergeant Dothros. He does manage to getting himself ready to receive the charge and to overwatch, of course, and try to kill as many Genestealers as he possibly can. And here's a close-up of the Mind Flayer getting ready to charge forward directly into the rest of the main characters. So because of that, we go directly to the Deathwatch's turn, and as you can see in this photo, Gregor Eisenhorn starts pulling back, starts advancing as quickly as he can, followed by Xiphon. At the same time, Sergeant Dothros tucks up directly into that little passageway as well in order to defend himself, so that way he can kind of delay action as much as he possibly can. And since they don't know any shooting or any fighting for that moment, we go directly to the Genestealer Cults, and as you can see in this photo, more Genestealers start pouring through that center passageway towards that center chamber, towards Dothros. So because that, he has pretty much an unending tide of Genestealers he has to deal with. At the same time, the Primarch charges right through the barricade and directly into Xiphon and the Salamander. So because of that, Xiphon is now currently engaged in close combat with the Patriarch. This does two things: one, to prevent Xiphon from escaping, and secondly, it also makes sure that Sergeant Dothros is now completely cut off. He's now stuck in a pincer attack where his only choices are to stand his ground and fight the unending tide of Genestealers coming his way, or charge forward and try to take on the the Patriarch, which could be pretty devastating because the Patriarch is a beast in close combat as well as psychic phases. So they're literally in the belly of the beast at this point. Here's a close-up of the Genestealers just skittering along and crawling through the tombs in order to get to Sergeant Dothros as quickly as possible, an unending tide of just pure claws, fangs, and death. And here's a close-up of Xiphon taking on the Patriarch, because the Patriarch just charged right through the barricade and started engaging that kill team member. Unfortunately for Xiphon, he did try to overwatch, but unfortunately his shots were unable to wound the Patriarch because that 5-up invulnerable save, he just kind of dodged it. In which case you can probably use your imagination imagining the Patriarch like climbing on the ceiling and jumping off the walls and stuff to prevent from being shot at, which is actually kind of cool, really cool cinematically speaking. And needless to say, during the combat phase, it does not go well for Xiphon. Xiphon just gets ripped in half by the Patriarch, and the Patriarch starts moving forward in order to engage into Gregor Eisenhorn. Now, if you'll notice, he is within 3 inches of Gregor Eisenhorn, so technically speaking, he could follow through and attack him. At this point, that my friend the Kyo decides to activate Cherubael, which is, of course, the Demonkin character that is attached to Gregor Eisenhorn at this point, because now it's a matter of, emergency at this point. And just like that, Cherubael, the Demonkin, does intervene, landing himself between Gregor Eisenhorn as well as the Patriarch. So as the Patriarch moves forward in order to close the distance between him and Gregor Eisenhorn, Cherubael intercepts, and because the two of them are in close combat now. And to be perfectly honest, if anything was to survive close combat against the Patriarch, which is the Mind Flayer, it's going to be Cherubael in order to do that. So because of that, we go directly to the top of the Genestealer Cults, and they start engaging in close combat. And because of that, we go for the rest of the narrative turns for Gregor Eisenhorn. During the move phase, you can see Gregor Eisenhorn decides to run forward and try to get as much distance as he can between the Patriarch as well as himself. At the same time, the kiddo then activates Sergeant Dothros and has him charge directly into the Patriarch because he is a Space Marine. If he's going to die, he's going to die fighting, against the Xenos threat. That's, because that's what they do for the Deathwatch. They take on Xenos and they make sure they try to kill them all at all costs. During the combat phase, unfortunately, Sergeant Dothros is not long for the world, and he gets killed by the Patriarch and manages to inflict 1 wound onto Cherubael, and Cherubael, unfortunately for him, was unable to cause any wounds onto the Patriarch. So because that pretty much ends the round of combat for this phase. However, as you can see in this photo, Gregor Eisenhorn does make his way through the labyrinth that actually sees the exit, which is the exit point out of this area in order to escape. And because of that, my friend the kiddo successfully navigated the scenario, and because of that brings us directly to the end of the battle report. So that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play some narrative background music real quick and take you to the narrative for the narrative campaign. We'll wrap the story up real quick, and then we'll go directly to the post game. With the dying cries of the Deathwatch operatives and the cheering screeches of the Genestealers still ringing in the echoing darkness of the tombs, Gregor Eisenhorn finally broke free from those hellish depths and onto the streets of the Underhive slums of Necromunda. Sergeant Dothros and his kill team were exemplary Adeptus Astartes, dying for the Emperor, fighting against the Xenos threats that posed to decimate the hive world of Necromunda. But their deaths were too high a cost for the Inquisitor. Without aid or support, Gregor Eisenhorn's thoughts turned darker still as he desperately sought a plan to combat the burrowing threat slowly emerging from the hellish depths of the Upside Down. Halt! In the name of the Emperor! A cry shouted out from the darkness of the urban hellscape. Emerging from the darkness in black mesh armor and executioner-styled helms strode the enforcers of the Adeptus Arbites, the understaffed and beleaguered semblance of law enforcement deep within Necromunda's Underhive. From the sigils upon their pauldrons and helmets, Eisenhorn learned that they were members from Precinct 13, the local enforcer's chapter house in this sector of the Underhive. With a stern grunt, Eisenhorn revealed his Inquisitor's sigil, the golden aquila shining bright even from the poor illumination of the urban wasteland. Apologies, Inquisitors, the squad sergeant replied. We were unaware of any activities from the Inquisition in this sector. How may we be of assistance? Seal off the entrance behind me, Eisenhorn commanded. There is a grave threat within those depths that could overtake the entirety of this hive. Have your officers cordon off the area, subdue and kill any who try to violate the perimeter, and inform your commanding officer that I am in need of their assistance in this matter. And, of course, take me to your precinct. There is much work to be done. And with that, the Abides enforcers charged through the streets, carrying out Eisenhorn's command. Two of the street judges quickly flanked the Inquisitor, escorting him to their patrol vehicles, intent on following him to the precinct headquarters. All the while, Eisenhorn mulled over the events of the moments before. He quickly realized that far more than insurrection and rabble-rousing cloyed the streets of the Underhive, that darker and more sinister plots and heresies were festering. And on his way to the station house, Eisenhorn pondered upon how best to deal with it, and pondered upon what challenges might further his path in the future. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, and with that, that brings us to the end of our very first chapter of our narrative campaign. It came from the Sump 2. This is the end of Chapter 1, The Upside Down. It was a pretty awesome narrative campaign so far. Hope you guys are enjoying the little narrative openings as well as the epilogues at the end of each scenario. Well, this is kind of a narrative thing we'll be doing for every single episode that we do for our narrative campaign. Now, just to give you guys a quick little heads up about the post-game, we do have experience points that are awarded to each of the characters that take place within the campaign. My friend the Kiddo was using Gregor Eisenhorn as well as the Deathwatch kill team Dothros in order to do this scenario. Unfortunately for her though, Deathwatch Dothros didn't make it, the kill team Dothros rather, didn't make it to survive the end of the scenario. However, Gregor Eisenhorn did. As a reward for completing the episode, my friend the Kiddo earned 3 experience points for Gregor Eisenhorn, in which case they also leveled up, and when she rolled off on the rewards table, he got +1 to his willpower, which is actually pretty good because as we go further into the campaign and we start using psychic tests and things of that nature, willpower will be extremely important for this character later on down the line. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's good to do it for this one. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Google+, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest news about our hobby. That's good to do it for this one, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this narrative campaign. We're really excited to produce it for you guys, and we're being stay tuned for more with more adventures from It Came from the Sump. So with that being said, we will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.